Hello, I'm going to do my summary for my Lifeworks video. I think I forgot to put in the information for my interviewees, so I thought I'd give that to you before my summary. The first interview I did was Sandy Wall, which is my grandmother, and she grew up 30 minutes from town in California. Her family was relatively poor. They lived in on base. Her father was in the military. They didn't really have a lot. They lived really far from town, so my grandma didn't really get to do much or didn't get to participate in any activities or anything like that. I think she kind of explained that in her interview, but and then my second interview was my grandfather, and he grew up in town in California. He was, I think, 4 years older than my grandmother. He grew up in town. He went to a huge school, huge, bigger than I ever went to. I always went to smaller schools, and he was in everything. So that was, I guess, their differences, and he was closer to town and did more, and his mom had a lot of money. They were very wealthy, and he was just participated in more. He had more money. She was more poor, more lived in the country. So those were the what I was supposed to say before the interview, but I forgot to put that in there. So my summary, what I learned in the interview. I learned a lot about my grandparents. I mean, stuff that they don't really say a lot, or they don't really talk about much. One of the way they grew up, they usually like to talk about how I grew up. But I really learned a lot. My grandmother, she talked of course, in the video, she was a little shy. She didn't really like to be in front of the camera, but after the camera, she talked to me a lot more about what had gone on, and it really amazed me at how I never realized how sheltered she was, and how, because she didn't live close to town, it was a lot harder for her to do stuff, and it really because she lived so far from the town, she was a different person for it, I think. I think it really contributed to who she became as a person. She wasn't as social. She was very shy. She didn't really talk to a lot of people because, I mean, she couldn't hang out with those people whenever she went home unless they would drive 30 minutes outside of town to go see her, which, I mean, most people won't do, especially whenever she was younger and you can't really drive. So she was more of the loner. She didn't have a lot of friends. She was very shy. She didn't really talk very much. She enjoyed school, but it wasn't really something that she wanted to go do, you know what I mean? And then, so I really think that contributed to the way she developed. And my grandfather, he's probably the most personable person I've ever met. He'll talk to anybody about anything. And he was very active, and he lived in town, and he did a lot. He talked about in his video, he swam, and he surfed, and he was on the gymnastics team, and he was on the diving team, and he was in the military, and he went to college, but until he got drafted because he forgot to sign the thing that says that because he's in school he can't be drafted. But yeah, it's really interested me, and I think there's a huge difference in the time periods of them growing up and me growing up, because I mean, they were telling me after the camera stopped rolling, because they didn't really, they felt weird, they said, for the camera, but afterwards they talked to me more about it, and they were telling me about how things were so different, and they used to go cruise down the strip in California and do all kinds of stuff, and it was a completely different world, and I think that contributes a lot to how they developed. And I never really realized the differences in, like, she lived outside of town, she was quieter, she didn't really do much, she didn't say much, there was no point in it. I mean, she wasn't going to go home and have these great relationships with these people. She hasn't kept in touch with a lot of her friends from high school. After she got married while she was in high school, and she had to move around with my grandfather while he was in the military. So she finished high school in a different high school, and she was pregnant at the time with my father, and people looked at her, even though she was married legally, people looked at her like she was a leper because she was married, or because she was pregnant and in high school. And it was just, now there's TV shows about it, you know what I mean? It's just so different and I think that really contributed, because she's talked to me many times about how they didn't want her to come to pep rallies, they didn't want her to come to any activities. Most of the time they didn't even want her enrolled in school, because the only reason she was enrolled is because her father had to come up there and tell them that she had to finish school. And it's completely different times. And she was a lot more poor. She had to help out a lot around the house, more than my grandfather did, especially because she was a woman. She had to help out a lot more. And but she didn't want to be. Her mother was it was a man's world in her mother's house, my great grandmother's, and my grandmother hated that. She didn't ever want to be like that. So she didn't want to cater to every man's whim and stay home and cook all day and raise the children. She wanted to have her own job. She wanted to be independent in the most independent way, like the most independent you can be while you're married. So I think that contributed a lot to her too, and just the way that they grew up and the time that they grew up and how their parents were, it really showed me a lot. And about how they developed and how they went through life. And if you look at how I've developed in my time period and what I've grown up around, and you look at them and you look at Erickson's stages of development, it really shows you how much your culture, how much everything around you, and how you grow up, how much money you have, even where you live, how close you are, how far you are from town, it really plays a large role into how we develop. And I never really realized that before. So it was very interesting to see that and to learn about the differences and the similarities, and look at how my grandmother is and think, how did she end up like this? What in her life drove her to become the person that she is today? What influenced her, and same with my grandfather, what influenced him and what made him grow up the way he is. And my grandfather, he loves being in activities, and he always has and he always will, and I think a lot of that has to play into how the fact that he was in a lot of activities whenever he was younger, and he enjoyed them immensely. He talks about him today to me, how he was a gymnast, and he surfed, and he did all kinds of stuff, and he was very active. And it's amazing to me how much that stayed with him. Even now, he's 69 or 70, and he still is the same. He loves to do that stuff, and it's just the development and how he was that, like, he just enjoyed that whenever he was younger, and it was available to him whenever he was younger, and it still is today. And he does whatever he can to be involved in city council, and he has his own antique store now, and he just does whatever he can. He likes to be in the middle of it, and it's amazing to me how much that affected his life and who he is just as a teenager, and involved in things. But yep, so that's what I learned and how I looked at things. And I'm sorry my my interview was shorter than I'd like them to be. My grandparents, they were just not having that whole camera thing. They thought it was the weirdest thing. Anyways, well, thank you for listening to me rant for about 10 minutes. And yeah, that's about it.